Hey, thank you. I've just got to get myself worked out there. So to get this going,
Press the left.
the left.
Should be.
No.
Maybe just the
I
arrow.
might-
My job back, please.
I think I might need my glasses here.
I don't know why the menu's coming.
What do we do, Raf? We just
Just click on that area.
right, next. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I'm going to talk about heavy truck stuff. Risk of brake fade on hills. Risk of jackknife during braking. Risk of rollover at roundabouts, and risk of side swipes on freeways. Just some cases I've been involved in, some talking points. I don't know the solution to all these problems, but I've got some examples that might promote some discussion.
You click on the arrow, see the arrow now.
Oh yeah, right, okay.
Click on that.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, there's some bad language in this. Note that sign. I'm going to start it again.
I think we've got the sound anyway.
Oh, haven't we? Right, okay.
Did you need?
Note that sign. Heavy trucks, heavy vehicles use low brakes. This is a video of the Mona Vale tanker crash in Sydney of 10, 12 years ago. This is Mona Vale Road in the outskirts of Sydney, and this guy is two behind. That's Cootes Tankers single petrol tanker there, just going around the corner, and everything seems to be under control, sort of. Yeah, well, single lane road, and this is a notable crash in the history of Australian truck crashes. Not the only one that Cootes had, and by the way, at the time, it had the name Cootes on it, but it was actually owned by someone else. It's not being Cootes' truck. So you'll notice that the tanker's getting a bit in front of that car. And it's a long downhill. It's 6 kilometres. And it's a pity we haven't got the audio, because the driver is in the car is saying, shoot. The truck has gone through a roundabout at the end of this long descent, and it's run into two cars. It went over the roundabout, ran into two cars, and we then had this conflagration that killed 3 people. And this particular event became of national significance in the road safety business. So we've got a full tanker of petrol that's it's crashed into 2 cars and overturned.
It just keeps on going.
So maybe I'll show it again, because trucks use low gear. Just keep mind on. So the problem here, of course, is brake fade. Heavy vehicles have brakes, drum brakes in particular, fade. Long 6 kilometre downhill. Not 6, I think it was 3 kilometres downhill. Roundabout at the bottom. Sorry?
What fails in the brakes?
The drums get bigger. The temperature of the linings causes the friction to go off. The performance falls off by 25-30%. No. Drivers always say they fail, but there's always brakes there, and we'll discuss this in a moment. So they get hot. They don't work as well, and they get out of adjustment because the drum gets bigger. So it's starting to run away here, and this is, we're into 1 kilometre from that sign.
How steep is this? It's quite steep.
4 or 5%. It's notable, but it's not, up the top of the list.
Enough for the truck to run away.
And the truck, you can't really see, but the truck's way ahead now, and it's just coming to a roundabout, the 60 kilometres. It's a 70, I think it was a 70 kilometres at the top, and it went straight through the roundabout into two cars, tipped over, and of course this was was actually the third major crash in the Coots name. There was another one in Cooirut 10 years before, and there was one on the south coast of New South Wales, so in the intervening time. So this became a really big political matter. Petrol, yeah.
Oh, this is New South Wales.
No, we had our share of problems. So I want to now see if I can move on. Okay, so I've shown the video. There's a sign at the top, trucks and bus use low gear. So the question is, what does that actually mean? And what do drivers know about? Do drivers know what that actually means in practice? Significant brake fade occurred, drum brakes, the drum gets bigger. Also, the temperature of the linings changes the friction performance. The brakes go off by 25, 30%, depending upon adjustment. Because if they're in good adjustment, you can take up some of that brake drum expansion. If not, you run out of stroke on the brakes. Drum brakes are better. Everyone's cars here is drum brakes. Disc brakes. On a truck, disc brakes are better too, but disc brakes fail. There's so much energy involved, you run the risk that the pads will come off, the disc will not work. So there's also a risk with disc brakes. Disc brakes aren't the panacea here. Now, the truck had an endurance brake. What's an endurance brake? Well, it's an engine brake in this case, but it could be a tail shaft retarder, something that is not related to the wheel end brakes and doesn't get hot. It can cope with the energy. We do not have a rule in Australia to do with endurance brakes. We don't mandate them, but virtually every heavy truck on the road has an endurance brake. However, to make it useful, you have to get the gear right. Because if the engine is not working very hard, low revs, the endurance brake doesn't do anything much for you. So you've got to get at the top of the hill, you've got to get the speed of this vehicle right before you go down. Because halfway down, you probably can't safely change the gear to change the ratio. The gearbox won't let you do it. Sorry? Because you have to have a balance, a good match between the engine speed and the road speed. And you have to, when you change the gear, you've got to have, there's quite a narrow range in which the cogs will go together. Beautiful. I don't agree. I agree in principle, but truckies get into trouble. They realise they're going too fast, and they're actually don't want to get out of gear because they're worried that they'll end in what's called angel gear, which is no gear.
What about the
This causes a lot of noise.
What about the automated vehicles? The ones
Yes,
small
they are getting better. 100%. They're getting better, and now they've integrated the control of this technology, the endurance brake, with gear changing. The system will now know what it's doing, but you can't beat the fundamental problem. The driver has got to go slow at the top of a big hill. That is the fundamental problem. You might get something extra out of a good technology, but you can't beat the physics.
Right. This makes a lot of noise, doesn't it?
Sorry?
This engine braking makes
Well, an engine brake is nothing more than an air compressor, so the answer is yes.
So you see the signs on the side of the road when you're going into small towns and they're downhill slopes. And they say don't use your
engine brake. Yeah, that's another issue.
They're encouraging using brakes, not engines. And that's on the roads. There's signs on the side of the road.
Sure, 100%. But a good professional driver will know that he or she, and by the way, female drivers are better than male drivers in this industry. The industry's worked this out. We need female drivers in the heavy vehicle industry because they treat the trucks better than the male drivers. So here's a domain where we need females because they perform better than males. The driver has got to get the speed right so that they're not relying on these systems to the limits. But point taken. So, next one. I did a report on the Coutts truck crash, and I also did a report on Warringah Road. Now, Warringah Road is not far from Monavale Road. And and this truck came down, you can see Warringah Road comes in at the top there, the red, and this guy had brake fade, he'd lost speed control. It was a Isuzu truck, as you'll see in a minute. He came around the corner and he rolled over, but let's call it a brake fade. And he rolled over there, and Raf, one of the cars that he rolled on had 2 serving police officers in it. So the police had a particular interest in this case. So it's an Isuzu truck. It's actually got what's called an exhaust brake, which is a poor man's engine brake. An engine brake is an air compressor, and it uses the engine, but the exhaust brake just has a butterfly valve in the exhaust system, so there's a bit more back pressure. You get a bit more. Your cars might have engine brakes, some of them. It's not as good as an engine brake, but it doesn't matter. If you don't have the engine working, revving hard, you don't get much torque out of it. So this guy came down the hill too fast and his brakes faded. And I did a report on this, just concentrate on the last bit. This is off Google Earth. It's quite steep, and right at the end is entry into Pittwater Road. So right at the end, you've got to make a turn. And so the New South Wales authorities knew this was a dangerous road, and they put lots of signs on it, steep descent ahead, They didn't, and then they put 20 kilometres an hour for trucks and buses. But this is a multi-lane road. They weren't game to put that sign on Monavale Road because it's a single-lane road. That's my opinion. If you put a sign that says trucks using 20 kilometres, you have all these cars behind you say, how can I get round this truck? For the next 4 kilometres, I'm going 20 kilometres an hour. I want to get around it. So they weren't game to do that, but they were game to do it on Warringah Road. So the New South Wales Authority said that the safe speed for a truck down a steep hill is actually 20 kilometres an hour. And I agree with them. The point is, if you force a truck to go 20 kilometres an hour, you have to get the gearing right so that the engine is doing most of the braking. This is my diagram that I often put into these reports I do. So this is 4 quadrants. So the top green one is good condition, good adjustment of the brakes. And then you go into the yellow, which is good condition, but it's poor adjustment because there's a bit of wear. You actually need to wind the slack adjusters or the whatever up, make them better. And then you go through 2 other quadrants which are bad. And the red one is poor condition, poor adjustment. Believe me, if you've got a truck going down a big hill, the brakes, at the bottom you'll say, I've got no brake left. If you're in the red, you'll say, don't work. And a heavy truck can achieve about 0.5 G deceleration if the brakes are in good shape. The ADR level is less than that. Let's call it 0.45. The in-service level for trucks, any vehicle, is 0.28. And by the way, there's a speed difference where you test this. So the 0.28 is actually in that, if you said 0.5 from 60 kilometres an hour, the 0.28 is from 35. It's only worth about 0.2. So this is pretty pathetic.
How
But
does this compare with cars?
Cars are the same.
Same, I think.
So, no, that's not true. Cars have, all of the levels go up by about 40%, I think. But when the brakes get really hot, you go round by 1 quadrant. Right, so if you're yellow, you end up in the orange when you go down Big Hill. particularly if you've had some heat get into the brakes beforehand. So the driver says, my brakes didn't work because the performance was just not what was expected. They're still working, they're just don't meet expectations. And so the only way to stay out of trouble is to use your endurance brake, which means getting the speed right at the top of the hill. So I've written articles about this over the years. Road Rule 108, trucks and buses low gear signs. This is a national rule. And if you go through that sign that says trucks and buses must use low gear, this is what the rule says. You're supposed to be able to go down this hill without the use of a primary brake. And the only way to do that is to get the speed right at the top. And so looking at many of these cases, I came to the conclusion that the answer to the question, trucks, what does it actually mean? It means 20 kilometres an hour at the top of a steep hill. But most truck drivers don't know this. It's not 40, it's not 50. The Coots driver went through at the top at about 72. Right? So at the top, it was okay. He'd been through the brakes were a little hot, but halfway down the hill, the brakes were only giving perhaps, the coroner and the authorities decided this truck had bad brakes. So it was sort of at the bottom of my diagram, and it had moved around one quadrant. So as far as the driver's concerned, he lost the brakes. He was sort of getting to the red, and he had not enough left to control at the bottom of the hill. And exactly the same for the guy in the Warringah Road case, who went to jail, but the first guy didn't. We'll come to that in a minute.
By the time he realises he's in big trouble, it's too late.
Yeah, you can't do anything about it. Because as a professional driver, you also know that if you try and change the gearbox is probably going to say, no, I'm not doing it. And you've got nothing. You've lost your engine retardation, so they decide not to do it. Anyway, for what it's worth, and we all respect the court system, the driver was found not guilty of any charge. Coots was found guilty of having a defective truck, and Rule 108 had no influence on the case at all. In contrast, the guy at the Warringah Road guy spent 18 months in jail before he got out on appeal. So the lesson from that is, if you're going to roll a truck over, don't roll it over onto a police car.
So how many brakes, Peter?
Sorry?
Condition of brakes, if the brakes are brand new, do you get double the effect or half the effect? A new truck with good brakes will exceed 0.5 G deceleration, and that is significant. You'll feel as though you're going towards the windscreen. Right? If you have a truck with worn brakes, not in good adjustment, it will be half of that.
That truck braking we saw at the end of Raf's video, that was actually tip-top shape, wasn't it? It was actually almost as though it was stopping on a dime. That was really top shelf.
Yeah, well, there was some. I agree with Raf that the brakes came on automatically. That's how it works. But we don't know. Raf may, but I don't know what the condition of those brakes were. But it was enough to lock the wheels.
It was another check by the mechanical.
Yeah. And by the way, the brake performance, of course, is limited by wheel lock-up. As soon as the wheels lock up, that's the limit of the brake. You actually get less after the wheels lock up. So here's another one. Coincidentally, Coots tanker had a fairly major crash in Kiwirup in Victoria a decade before, and 5 people were killed, I think, yes. And it was the wall of water incident. So this is a counterpoint to what I've just talked about, because in my opinion, I wrote a report about this too, the problem was unwise use of the endurance brake. So that's the other side of the coin. So this particular truck, and this is a newspaper article, the coroner, Graham Johnson, looked at this one. It said there's not much doubt that the truck jackknifed, and I'll go ahead and come back. The road this was the old South Gippsland Highway in Cooirup, and it didn't have the barrier there in the middle. It was just this space at the time. And the Coots truck, which was empty, was coming along in the high-speed lane. And if you know Cooirup, it's near Western Port Bay, and the ground is not very good there. So they tend to have a lot of trouble with this road sinking and breaking up and whatever. There's a lot of movement. And this particular place, this is not where it happened, but there was some undulations and some rutting and some problem with the bitumen. So the truck comes along, my story, the truck comes along, it's got an empty tanker, and it's got a fairly powerful engine brake. It's a Mack truck. And the engine brake had two settings, low and high. It was on high, but it's an empty trailer. And so this guy came along to a place where there was a bit of the bitumen was not flat, and it was raining, and he took his foot off the throttle. And that brought the engine brake, the endurance brake, automatically. And then the problem with endurance brakes is that they only act through the drive wheels. And so he also may have put his foot on the brake at the same time because it was rough. And the consequence was that the drive wheels momentarily locked, and it slid the truck towards the gutter, and all of a sudden he's heading in the wrong direction. And by the time he corrected that, he hit 2 cars and killed 5 people. Now, none of this came out in court. So, no, because our court system is not inquisitorial. The court system is there to determine whether someone is guilty as charged or not. And the lawyers will decide what evidence goes into a court. And quite often, in my experience, fundamental things get not told in court. And in this case, I think in the Coots case, the first one, the court really was not appraised of what the driver should have been doing, because it became about Coots, because the New South Wales government decided to attack, or the RTA decided to attack Coots. So, and we even had vehicle inspections in Victoria because of that crash. Coots was in the gun, and the driver managed to flip through. In this case, the driver was never charged because Vic Roads were guilty of not having a good road. So neither of them, this driver never got charged at all. The Warringah case, because he tipped over onto a police car, he got charged.
Okay, so on that point, with the driver, what should have the driver have done?
This guy?
Yeah.
Well, first point, he should not have used full engine brake power. He's got an unladen tanker, and this is back in 2002. It's got an unladen Mack truck with no ABS system on it. Nowadays, we would be better because the ABS system has some veto control of endurance brakes. So the performance would be better. But at the time, it didn't have that technology. And the point I'm making is that a whole lot of stuff that should have been said in court never got said in court. So I think I've made the point. He was on the point of changing lanes. He'd overtaken, was coming back. He hit some bad road, took his foot off, and the truck became unstable because basic physics of a single trailer truck, you can have 3 modes. If you lock the front wheels up, you end up with understeer. The truck doesn't go where you want it to go. If you lock up the drive wheels, then the truck jackknives. And that's sort of what happened in this Cooirup case. And if you lock up the back wheels, the trailer swings. Because locked wheels cannot provide the stabilising forces you need to keep your truck under control.
How do you achieve the last one?
Just by having, easy, you take the weight off the trailer. Because the brakes have been sized for the weight. But if your trailer was unladen, as it was in this case, But that top one can also occur because the trailer will overrun the truck and push it sideways if you're not careful. So anyway, truck drivers should know all this. We now have electronic systems that try and control it.
Surely the brake force is sensitive to the load on the axle.
No,
The cars have that in the 60s.
no, no. That's you're calling that's brake distribution control. 100%. It's a good thing, but we still do not have a rule that says we need to proportion the brakes according to the load carried by the axle. Because the fundamental principle of safe braking is that each axle brakes the load that it carries. Unfortunately, the load changes, both in terms of loading on trucks and also the dynamics on the road. So there's a whole lot of issues there, but our systems are getting smarter, and we're a generation in front now because we've got smart technologies that can figure out what's happening at the wheel ends. So our safety is getting better, no question about it. I want to talk about rollover crashes. So
before you go on to that, so how many people died in that
Five.
fireball?
Oh, three in Coos 1-3, yeah. But there was another one on the New South Wales South Coast before that 4 or 5 people died in. Because when a petrol tanker goes AWOL, it's bad. Vic roads love roundabouts, and that's good. I'm not really arguing against it. I'll just point out the problems that they make. This is in Echuca. And this is the Murray-Goulburn Highway, the red path. And they had this road that went off, it's called Warren Road, and it goes off to Echuca. But there's a lot of trucks on this road. They don't want to go to Echuca. They just want to go straight. But the council or Vic Roads or someone in their wisdom said, oh, well, we've got a road to Echuca, we really should put a roundabout in here. So you can sort of figure out what's going on from this satellite. I mean, this is a big deal. The Deputy Prime Minister and all the hot head honchos are there.
I think it's more of a, I don't know what that is, but it's really not a roundabout. It's not going all the way. It's kind of,
Well, that's what we ended up with. Now, you can imagine a truck coming down. Now, you've created an S-bend, a massive S-bend, and out, right? So that's what it ended up looking like. And, you know, I've investigated a couple of rollovers at this place. And even the local policeman decided not to charge these drivers because he said, this is a shit roundabout. That's what he said. Nah, I'm not charging. So, I mean, we do these things. Well, maybe we have to do them. I'm not saying it's bad necessarily. We've got to have roundabouts, I guess. But the point is that I'll come back. The point will be that 20 kilometres an hour is a good speed for trucks going through roundabouts. That's the point. This is a tanker. This is in Tasmania, and this tanker was carrying live fish in water. Yep, without baffles, because the baffles are bad for fish. Don't laugh. So this guy, and we all enjoyed Arnold Dix's presentation a while ago. Well, Arnold Dix, believe it or not, wrote a report about fatigue, the causes of rollovers in tanker vehicles. He wrote it for Murray-Goulburn because the worst trucks for rollovers are milk tankers. Windy roads, early mornings, and so Murray-Goulburn had that many rollovers, they got Arnold Dix to write this report. And it's a brilliant report that has guided a lot of the industry ever since. I've got a copy of it, and I spoke to Arnold about it. Is Arnold Arthur? Oh, Arnold. I spoke to him about it and congratulating him on doing it. Something called the Gardner Foundation paid for this work. I don't know who they are, but it's still a benchmark 20 years later. I know this because I did a follow-up study for Murray-Goulburn on whether they'd implemented all the recommendations for the Dix report. Anyway, this guy
First day back after 2 weeks on leave, and he's got a full load of fish. And he goes down this hill in Tasmania, and it's got a lead in. It says it's a moderate slope, 2.7. I mean, 2.7 is moderate. 5 is getting up there. 10 is excessive for a truck. And it's got a bit of a blind corner, but there's no cars. It's way out in the back blocks. And he ended up going off the road. He missed the pole, but he ended up rolling over right at the bottom there. And we can only speculate about this, whether brake fade was an issue or not. But I'll point out that this was his first day back after 2 weeks on leave. And according to Arnold Dix, that is the number one risk factor for rolling over a truck. Going on leave and coming back.
Performance trips, we call it.
Yep. So here's another one I looked at. This is a concrete agitator. And this one's a 6% slope. Speed rated for 30 kilometres an hour. In my view, too high because my rule is 20. And you can see what's happened. It's a concrete agitator. It's a Holcomb truck. And the connection between, well, I'll show you another one before I say what I'm going to say. This is Buller Road.
Oh, yes.
And Buller Road's a beauty because it's got this fairly steep hill. And by the way, there's some other hills along the way before you get to Buller Road. And then you come down and we've got this right angle bend at the bottom. Right. So, and Joe's ready mix truck ends up on its side because he can't get round the corner, and he's saying my brakes didn't work. In other words, I was in the wrong gear.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's some connection between these last three examples because you get load shift. In a tanker, the water sloshes to one side, and in an agitator, the concrete, it goes anti-clockwise and it decides to dump, and that disturbs the whole suspension. So you get this rock in the thing as you're going around the roundabout. All of a sudden, whoof, and the truck does, and half of it is doing that to you. So you end up with concrete agitators, a nightmare for roundabouts. So 20 kilometres an hour on a good day is nice for a concrete agitator. 40 kilometres an hour is at risk, seriously at risk. So they're very simple rules. So I guess the message here is, yes, get the technology right, but also train your drivers to know what it actually means in practice. You just have to have this rule. If you're going around a roundabout in a truck, go 20 kilometres an hour. If you're going down a steep hill, go 20 kilometres an hour at the top of the hill, not the bottom.
Has any of the ESC technology sort of made a difference?
Well, it gives you a better safety margin. The truck is smarter. And you've got some rollover controls in the ESC as well. It'll try and bring the brakes on. But if your brakes are hot, it won't work. So you've got to get it right at the top. Here's another concrete agitator. This guy, so this is in Adelaide, and I can't say too much about it because the NHVR is actually prosecuting the owner of this fleet of concrete agitators. And of course, a legal case takes 5 years. And in the meantime, everyone's in limbo, including the victim's wife.
Yes.
We should be able to settle legal cases in 2 years. We really should.
Yeah.
Our process is shithouse. Anyway, this is on the news. I know a lot more about this than I'm going to tell you, but it was on the news. And I just say, they said the man had been with them for many years and was a good driver. And I think he was a good driver. But he came down a long hill, he got the speed wrong at the top, and he never recovered. And of course, the authorities say that the truck brakes are out of adjustment and worn and whatever, so the NHVR is getting stuck into the operator. Fair enough, fair to take responsibility, but drivers get it wrong all the time. They get it wrong, and concrete agitators are the worst of the lot. And you'll get there's a bend right at the bottom of this 5 kilometre long downhill in the Adelaide Hills, the cabin was crushed and he died.
Oh,
Would it be fair to say, Peter, that purely just for the road conditions, truck drivers should be able to operate their vehicle without brakes at all, just using the engine?
That is correct. That's what Rule 108 says.
And the brakes are just there to accommodate traffic issues and cars doing funny things.
Yes, yes, that is correct. But truck drivers, they should do that. They don't often because the following traffic doesn't want to follow a 20 kilometre per hour truck. That's a problem, but there's the physics of the situation. That's what you've got to do. Anyway, there is a measure of rollover stability of trucks. It's called the SRT, static rollover threshold, and it's very simple. It's the wheel, the track width divided by twice the height to the centre of mass. That gives you a figure of merit for rollovers. Doesn't matter what weight's on your truck. It's taken into account by the height. Sorry? Say again?
This one.
5.
There's a bit of give in the suspension that you have to take account for. So the give in the suspension takes off your stability. So it's a correction factor. And so we all know this sort of approach, and people calculate this stuff. I just want to make the point that it's a figure of merit for rollover. It's like sitting on a chair. You can work out the track width versus the height of your bum. That'll give you whether you're going to fall off or not. Although the track width, you have to think about this carefully because some people use the track width right to the edge of the tyres, but you should use it to the centre of the tyres. And these are dual tyres, so you've got to think about what you're doing. It's not regulated in Australia. This is not a design rule issue because design rules apply to chassis cabs. That's before somebody puts a body on. It's not an original equipment requirement. It's not regulated. It is regulated for dangerous goods tankers, and they have actually quite a high number of 0.53. It's actually equal to 0.5, meaning it's the horizontal acceleration on the hill, on the curve.
Keep going, Peter.
It's in terms of G, it's actually your acceleration at which you roll over. So it's got some physics involved in it. Performance-based standards vehicles have to meet a standard of 0.35 because this is the scheme that the NHVR runs where you tell them what the load is and what your truck looks like. So we at least do have a standard for some long and heavy trucks. But I make the point that cornering forces are proportional to speed squared. Forces go V squared on R. And if you make V too big, you'll never recover because you've got too much on the top line. And if you make the radius too small, then you never recover because it makes the whole thing big. And if you put an S-bend into a roundabout, you will make the radius really small because the driver has got to do things very quickly to get around this S-bend. And furthermore, if you've got a load on the trailer or the truck, it will go to one side and that'll make it worse. So the S-bends are just an accident waiting to happen for trucks. And drivers don't really, I don't think, understand all this. Sensible speed for a truck around any sharp corner is about 20 kilometres an hour. And next time you see a truck go around a corner at 20 kilometres an hour, ring me up and tell me. Endurance brakes are not mandated or regulated in Australia. So they're great things, but they have this problem that if they come on automatically, you might get a jackknife type event, and that's bad. So safety's got different aspects to it. You've got to think of it all through. Now I want to come back to another one that occurred on the Monash Freeway. Now I just want to see who's in the audience, just in case I know what I'm allowed to say. Because I was going to talk about this as my number one, but I got told to shut up. So I've tried to stay away from anything that was controversial. I want to talk about mirrors. Now, yeah, mirrors are simple, bit of shiny stuff.
allows you to see what's on the side or at the back. So we have in our mirror rule, ADR 14.0 something or other, 14.0 version 2, devices for indirect vision. We have an international path.
You know, this is being recorded, Peter, is that okay?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
But I think you
Thank
said
you.
everyone, is this the case which you said there's pending legal action on the city?
No, it's all gone through the courts, but there was a whole lot of. So this is another one of my themes, because what went to the court is not the full story. And in this case, a beautiful young woman died in a Suzuki Swift car, and the guest. It's a very simple matter, and this is in the public space. I'm not telling you anything here that's not in the public record. You've got this Isuzu truck, which has got a signboard on the top of it, and it's quite wide. They've made it 2.5 metres wide at the back because they want the signboard to have some angle to it, and the truck cabin's a lot thinner. And they're going down the Monash Freeway. In fact, I might come back to that. Let me just jump ahead for a minute. Okay, so many in this room will know this road. This is the Monash Freeway, and it splits. And one part of it goes to Berwick and one part of it goes to Cranbourne. There's a merge. And it's a pretty major road, because when you look at it on Google Maps, you'll find in the area of interest that there's actually 5 lanes. And 2 of them go off to Cranbourne, and 3 of them go, or is it 2? 2 or 3 go straight ahead. So what happened in this matter is that a Isuzu truck, an old truck with a sign on the back, finds himself, it's a he driver, and there's some doubt about which lane he's in, or he says he's not in the lane that the police think he's in. Let's just assume he's in the far left lane. And for some reason, he's decided to change lanes. He's either deciding he's going to Berwick, or he's got confused. For some reason, he decides to change lanes. But there's a car next to him. Now, his version of events is that car merged into him and whacked his truck. Other people say that his truck sideswiped the car. Unfortunately, the tray on this truck, which stuck out quite a long way, 400 millimetres, pierced the side of the Suzuki car and had the effect of locking up the rear wheels on one side, so the car became unstable. And it actually went in a curve, and it went across into these other lanes where it was whacked by a VW. And was whacked more or less in the back. And I think this is on the public record, because there was a trial. The seatbelt, when the victim was found, she was not wearing a seatbelt. And it's hard to believe that she didn't have it on in the first place. And the airbags didn't go off. The front airbags didn't go on. And yet the car was really whacked hard at the back. So there's a couple of issues there about the car. But the main point is that this driver, the truck driver, was charged with dangerous driving, and it went to court. So, and the issue of what this driver could see was not part of this case. I got involved and I wrote a report, and I wanted to know whether the driver could actually see cars next to him in the adjacent lane or not, because that would be relevant to his perceptions and whatever. So I want to go back a bit and just talk about the mirror rule and how bad it is in Australia. So we've got a mirror rule, that's got, I'll call it a Eurocentric path or an international path. It comes from the ECE regulation. And we've got a North American path, because historically Australia has had North American trucks. And so we always provided a path. The North Americans have flat mirrors. The Europeans have curved mirrors. So in our wisdom, we came up with a rule where we said, okay, flat mirrors, yeah, they're okay. Fine. Let's just think about the visibility aspects here. In the European path, the Europeans have nailed this. They've got visibility limits that are in the design rule. So this is the primary mirror, which is usually curved, but it doesn't actually have to be curved. You have to be able to see that space. And you can imagine that you could sort of hide a car somewhere up at that, where the one, at the start of this, you could have a car that was hidden to the driver in the mirrors. This is a minimum requirement, of course. But the Europeans have nailed this because they also require you to have a class 4 mirror, which is wide angle. And this has got a 400 radius curvature on it, usually. And so you can see a lot of stuff in that curved mirror. And so the Europeans have at least 2 mirrors. There's some other mirrors I don't want to talk about, it's not relevant, but you can see all around the European truck. And the class 4 stuff is mandatory if you come from the European path. So the Scanias and the Volvos of the world know all about this, and they can provide that. So just keep that in mind, that the Europeans have got this requirement. So, or you can go the flat mirror path, which is Appendix C, and it says, this is what it says. You've got to put a mirror on, it's got to be at least 150 millimetres square, and capable of reflecting to the driver as far as practical a clear view of the road to the rear of him and of any following or overtaking vehicle. So this is leaving it to the equipment manufacturer. Well, there's no performance standard here at all. And of course, it also says you can put other mirrors on if you want to. And to be fair to the industry, in Australia, heavy vehicle drivers like flat mirrors. And the reason is that you get a clearer view at the rear of the truck. You have better depth perception. There's no distortion. You can see things because they're a bit bigger than in a curved mirror. So nearly every truck on the road in Australia has got a flat mirror. Most of them also have a curved mirror, which gives you the wide angle part. So even though the rule doesn't require it, nearly all trucks are sold with a flat mirror and a curved mirror. Okay, so I think I've just made that point. Visibility there's no standard. And recently the rules got changed. They introduced this extra rule 1403 because Australia is about to allow slightly wider trucks, 50 millimetres wider. And so as part of the horse trading that goes on, they've decided that if you have a flat mirror and if your truck is wider than 2.5 metres, which means if it's European, then you have to have the class 4 mirror. Well, they haven't done that for any other sort of truck.
As well.
Yeah, but that's only for extra wide trucks. So there's some horse trading. Why they didn't do this for all trucks, you can explain to me at a later date. So this man, quite a nice guy, I've met him, he got found guilty by a jury. None of the evidence to do with the visibility of the mirror visibility was ever put to court. It was just a question of, did he move over or did she move over? And he was found guilty and put on a good behaviour bond or whatever he was. Okay, he's not a bad guy, but this beautiful young woman should not have died in this matter. And none of this is ever going to go to court, I think, because there's probably not going to be a coronial inquest when there's been a criminal case that's been decided. Anyway, I went and sat in this truck and I have a video. Maybe we're out of time to show the video, but just take this from me. This truck has got a flat mirror and it's also got a curved wide angle mirror. The truck's 20 years old. The wide angle bit at the bottom doesn't hold its position. The joint has failed. And you can see somebody has tried to put some Celastic or something or other to hold it in place. But it didn't work, it's come loose. And you push the mirror and it just doesn't hold its position. So I came to the view that he did not have an effective wide-angle view, and he probably just didn't know she was there. And so the point of this story is we've got a pretty crappy mirror rule, because if you don't need the mirror, it's not necessarily a roadworthiness issue. I mean, you'd like to think that a roadworthy inspector would complain about that, but we don't have mandatory truck inspections in Victoria, so no one's going to see this. And so I think the mirror rule's crap. And I've written about this to the regulator and in magazines. Most of them have a wide-angle mirror, but it's not mandated by regulation. There's no performance standard for it. Thanks for listening.